The Shop 3 Sheep Eater. Written and read by W.P. Thrift, who can be contacted at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. And cover art created by JD, contactable at Radix_L on Twitter. Chapter 18, The Deep Ones. How long had he been here? Did it even matter anymore? When there's no difference between day and night, no way to tell the time, even weeks or months become concepts that have long since lost any meaning. Tally marks on the wall were just guesses, marking the times that Liquid had woken up. He had kept it going for 537 gashes in the cold, brown, clammy wall. Clammy, as in literally made of clams. It was to discourage prisoners from banging on the wall, as they had badly cut up their hands if they even tried it. It worked, most of the time. After 537 tally marks, he stopped. It was pointless. He learned this when a guard told him that he had slept for 12 hours and then was awake for 24 hours most of the time. His day had shifted into a 32-hour cycle, so even more time than he realized had passed. Liquid had first woken up in this cell some unknown length of time ago, half wondering if this was hell. The smell of fish was thick in the air. The ground was cold stone. He screamed as he rolled over, on the thin mat they gave him to sleep on, and the jagged clams on the wall cut into his skin, up and down his body. The bars were still, and slid over when opened. The hallway, beyond his cell, was an extension of the cell itself. More clams on the walls, and stone-tiled floors. There were no windows anywhere, and torches burned on the walls outside of the hall endlessly, each torch 10 feet apart. The torches were all wooden sticks wrapped in cloth and set ablaze. They needed to be replaced twice a day, although sometimes the guards wouldn't bother, and this hallway would slowly go pitch black. The main question on his mind was about Sheep Eater. Had he been defeated? The world was not destroyed after a week of being down here. That much he could be sure of. But he was immediately able to sleep peacefully again after arriving, as peacefully as he could, while being imprisoned by the Deep Ones. The Deep Ones only laughed at his questioning, informing him that this nest had been long ago guarded against the influences of the old gods. So Sheep Eater may have been killed, or at least forced to retreat, but how long that had taken was unknown to him, which meant Lantis could have well been slain by the cannonball that struck the ship, only for another hero to come along. It was impossible for him to assess without knowing how much longer Sheep Eater had held influence over the land above. Not that this would have given him any sort of definitive answer, but it would have been something, some small amount of information he could have used to possibly hazard a more accurate guess. The land above, Liquid could tell from the atmospheric pressure when he first arrived that he was roughly a mile below sea level. So, he was further off the coast from Rayleigh than where they had dragged him down. Or he was simply very deep beneath the ground now. The pressure had normalized for him quickly enough, but he had noted this fact back when he was still able. Back then, Liquid still exercised thoughts of escaping from this prison someday. If he had to guess, that was about 3 years ago. He had been imprisoned by the Deep Ones for 3 years now, but that was only a guess. If someone told him it had been 20 years, he would not have been that surprised. Liquid currently wore only a loincloth. Well, a loincloth and the beard of a crazy murder hobo. It was all the Deep Ones would permit. There was no hope of getting his stealth suit back. It was shredded shortly after his arrival here. He knew it was because he saw the guards prancing around wearing torn-up pieces of it. They liked to play dress-up with the stuff they scavenged from the surface world. Whether that was something their kind found fashionable, or was just done as a way to taunt the prisoners, Liquid had no idea. He had never asked them, either. It should go without saying, but yes, he had tried contacting the Marches with the nanomachine radio in his blood, but no dice. The signal wasn't strong enough to pierce through so many leagues of ocean. He was completely cut off from the world above down here. Liquid just laid on his mat currently, twirling a spoon around in his fingers. The spoon he had kept during one of the so-called meals they fed the prisoners. Most prisoners being other deep ones, but a few humanoids came in here every now and again, captured when their boats capsized near Deep One territory. The meals were almost always seaweed. He wasn't certain of its nutritional value, but he had grown very sick of it a long, long time ago. If he ever did get out, he was never going to touch another green vegetable ever again in his life. Too many revolting memories of that crap would come back to him. It and its slimy, disgusting texture. He had used the spoon to carve the tally marks in the walls, at first assuming the fishmen would get annoyed by this. But they never said anything about it, so he just kept doing it. He also thought about using the spoon to slowly tunnel out of here, either digging under a sleeping mat or Shawshanking them by convincing them to give him a poster to hang up on his wall and start digging under it. Sure, it was entirely possible that the moment he broke through the surface of the prison, he would be crushed by seawaters raging into the tunnel he had just dug. But on the off chance he figured out how to avoid being immediately crushed to death, there was a chance he could make it a half-mile straight up to the surface, and then just swim over to Rayleigh, if Rayleigh was close enough to be visible from where he surfaced. Come to think of it, that was actually a completely, unworkably stupid idea. But it was still fun to imagine. They did actually find him a poster one day, as he had been requesting. It was scavenged from some wreck. Liquid had a hot streak going on in the arena. Oh, that's right, the arena. They also made him fight for their amusement. So, he was due some kind of prize. They handed him the poster. But the poster they had found him was a nude bromide of Bowman. The perfect cover-up for a potential wall tunnel. But he quickly returned it to them. He put the end of the spoon in his mouth, and he wished that it was a cigarette. It was so annoying to him that the ultimate way to kill time, a smoke break, had been completely denied to him throughout the entirety of his stay here. Moans of sorrow escaped into the hallway for a moment, but Liquid ignored it. He knew a new prisoner had joined him on this block recently. The only way that he knew that there was more cell blocks than this one was because of the battle arena. He'd always see opponents out there that he wouldn't recognize while being led back and forth to his cell. And he did like the battle arena just fine. It gave him some exercise and something to do. Always something new to look forward to, every once in a while. Of course, most competitors in the arena found it to be a much bigger deal than that. It was a huge deal to the Deep Ones themselves, who were all becoming very partial of Liquid. Over half of their entire economy circulated annually through gambling bets made on the outcome of arena matches between gladiators. As far as the prisoners go, the arena was seen as a non-stop life-and-death struggle for them, and the horror they experienced at having to take the life of another lest they themselves be killed haunted them day and night. But again, Liquid never thought much about it. He was good at killing, with or without weapons, and taking lives no longer fazed him. Arena ranged from the highlight of his day, if he just wanted to get out and stretch, to a mild annoyance if he didn't feel like getting up. But he had to get up and fight, or he would be speared to death in his cell. So he'd always reluctantly get up and do it, whether he felt like it or not. Though, in his current reality, and Liquid was somewhat aware of this, if he refused to get up one day, the guards would most certainly not spear him to death. That threat went out the window years ago when he started crushing opponents out there and becoming the king's favorite champion. Not favorite enough to set him free, but still, the day they started giving him double rations of seaweed was the day he no longer had to fear getting killed by some random guard for stupid reasons. But, God, he kind of wanted to throw a match just to stop getting double rations of that crap. He didn't want to eat it, but starvation compelled him to. Too bad losing always meant death. If someone refused to kill their opponent, they would both be killed, and no amount of favoritism would ever save either opponent. So throwing a match to lose favor was kind of out of the question if he wanted to keep living. But did he? Really? What was the point? He had no escape plan. The moans of the damned finally stopped, and he felt a little bit better. He rolled over on his mat, taking a spoon out of his mouth and sliding it under the mat. He began to do push-ups. Had to keep his strength up, after all. Even if he couldn't get out and jog, he could at least do push-ups, sit-ups, and squats every day. He wished there was something he could hang from to do pull-ups with, but no dice. The first push-up made a deep gash in his side begin to ache. Some stupid asshole with a sword nicked him good in the last fight. A few more push-ups and he realized it just wasn't happening. He was too injured. So he collapsed onto his stomach, laid his head on his arms, which he had folded under his head, and he just stared at the wall some more. He occupied his time by debating which smelled worse, the shithole in his cell or the fish smell that was everywhere else. He just couldn't call a winner of this contest. But if he did, then he would have nothing else to do. So instead he made a list of pros and cons in his head for each one. A banging on his cell door was followed by an order to get up. Well, that's one con right there. You're one of 'em. Liquid grumbled.
But what was that?
The fishman glubbered at him. I said, fuck you, I'm getting up. Liquid replied, forcing himself up. He held a hand over the stitches on his side, made from some crude seaweed-based string, no doubt.
Don't try to garner sympathy with that, Mr. King's favorite,
Bellowed the deep one guard.
You fight today. It has already been decided.
Liquid didn't reply. He had never once refused to fight. Again, these things weren't big deals to him, but nobody ever seemed to quite wrap their heads around that fact, finding it impossible to believe that someone could be so largely indifferent to a life-and-death struggle. There was one moment of hesitation, however, when Liquid passed by a certain cell going down his hall. A young woman had been in it last week, which he had taken some note of, and now sought to glance over her way to see how she was holding up. But she wasn't there. A new deep one was. While the deep ones mostly all looked alike to Liquid, this one had a relatively distinct branding on her. Red highlights around her gills. That's... Liquid turned to the guard to say something, but the guard shoved him forward. Two more guards were behind that one, spears half tilted forward, just daring him to try and shove back. Liquid didn't say anything. He kept going. But he was certain that deep one was the princess. She always sat next to her father, the king that favored Liquid, during almost every single match he fought in. But why would the king imprison his own daughter? Liquid quickly decided that he just didn't care, yet his brain kept nagging at him about it, due to the complete lack of other stimuli. The prison hallway led into a much better lit marble hallway. Actual furnishings, made by crafters that knew what they were doing, lined the walls. And they even would have looked comfortable if they weren't made out of stone. This was some kind of commons area for the guards, though he wouldn't be staying here long, as he had to cut straight across the hallway and into another terrible, seashell-walled tunnel. That tunnel led to a small stone holding cell with a giant iron gate, which would open to let him out straight into the arena. He sat down on a stone bench, and the guards exited the room, slamming a steel gate closed behind them and locking it. No one was allowed to leave until one gladiator was dead. Until at least one gladiator was dead. Liquid decided he would like to go for a run today, so he anticipated the iron gate opening and letting him into the arena. He knew it very well by now, 100 feet in diameter. A perfect circle, the ground covered in sand, soft and from the beach, surrounded by a 20-foot wall, above which sat maybe 200 lucky deep ones that had managed to get tickets to that day's arena matches. Walled off in his own special section of the stands was the king, sitting on his massive, bejeweled throne, made from gold with a red velvet seat. And right beside the king, on both sides, there was a slightly smaller throne for the princess and the prince. While the princess sometimes may not show up, though Liquid supposed at this point she definitely wouldn't be showing up again if she were imprisoned, the son very, very rarely made an appearance. In fact, Liquid could only recall seeing him maybe 2 out of the hundreds of matches he had fought in. Maybe the son just wasn't as bloodthirsty as his father, or even his sister? Who knows? Hell, Liquid only knew that the prince and princess were male and female by the fact that they were announced as such whenever they appeared.
The beautiful, enchanting Princess Fiora!
The Deep One announcer, in his booth directly across from the king, always declared when she was present. Liquid would not be hearing that announcement today. The iron gate opened, and Liquid knew it was time for his brisk jog. He'd have to keep it brisk, as the king would order his death if he thought he were stalling. But the king also knew by now that Liquid liked to fuck around out here, and wouldn't be too surprised to see him take off from the gate and run large circles around the arena for even several minutes before attacking his foe. Because soon as the foe was dead, guards would arrive to take him back out of here and bring him back to his holding cell.
And here comes everyone's favorite, the human being Liquid! All the way from the surface world.
The announcer called out,
Let's hear it, everyone, for his 500th match! If he wins today, he'll have beaten the old record by more than an unbelievable 412 matches.
Oh, holy shit, Liquid thought, actually being brought back a bit by that. Is that really how many times I fought now? Wow, time flies. He knew he didn't have to fight every single week most of the time. But this last month they had really been pushing him hard, and now he knew why. The gambling ring was likely banking on someone hitting a nice, round, big number. They saw he was within shot of it and began to push him. The last time they had called out his matches was when he nailed his 88th victory and became the new record champion. That was only, he believed, though he may have lost count, 22 matches after he had become the king's favorite. But that record felt like an eternity ago to him, more like a dream he had once had than a real memory. Constant imprisonment had a way of making one's real life just feel less real.
And his challenger, who has scored an impressive 50 victories himself, seeks to someday break Liquid's record. Please welcome to the arena, Lord Smashington!
The announcer called out. Of course, Lord Smashington was a deep one. They never called out species for them, as they were just seen as being normal people around here. So Liquid would be announced as being a human. Other things would be announced, too, such as the intelligent gorilla he had to fight once. But the deep ones? They were always just introduced by their names. Just a fun fact, though. Liquid was certain that, no, Lord Smashington did not give two shits about breaking any sort of record. It's not like they ever interviewed the prisoners. They just made stories up about them to entertain the crowds. The Deep Ones believed all kinds of things about Liquid that simply was not true. He was always hearing the announcer talking about his history, his backstory, where he came from, what he did, how he felt about the different matches, and it was always bullshit. But be that as it may, Lord Smashington also most certainly would not just roll over and die, because that would mean he would be dead. And anyone with 50 victories under their belt in this arena certainly didn't value the lives of others over their own life. Liquid barely paid any mind to Lord Smashington as he started his brisk jog. He figured he could evade the guy easily, until he was done stretching out his legs a good bit. However, Lord Smashington freaked out when he saw Liquid take off running. There were weapon racks at the opposite corner of the arena from where the gates had opened, and Smashington likely believed Liquid to be running to grab a weapon. Smashington wanted to get there first, and he would. He arrived, grabbed a mace, and went to swing at Liquid, but Liquid had already vaulted over his head and just kept on going. Lord Smashington stood there for a moment, confused, when his opponent had not attacked him from behind immediately after getting behind him. That would also place Liquid right next to the weapon rack, too, with everything readily available for the taking. Swords, maces, javelins, anything but projectiles or small weapons. Both were once used, Liquid had heard, way back in the day, but gladiators with projectiles and nothing to lose quickly learned how easy it was to turn those weapons upon the king and the crowd. And also smaller weapons like knives could be hidden even in as minimal of clothing as prisoners were allowed, and used on the guards in an attempt to escape. Bigger weapons could also be turned on the guards, of course, but that's why upwards of 20 guards will enter the area after the arena match is over, and attacking them is not only fruitless but punishable by extended years of torture. So it's best to just put the weapons down and go back to your cell quietly. Be happy that you get to live another day.
And Liquid is running scared of his foe,
The announcer boomed.
Does this mean the highly anticipated upset victory is now inevitable?
Highly anticipated, Liquid thought. That struck him as a very odd thing to suggest, given his amazing track record. The giant Deep One was chasing him around the arena, not letting him get his fun run out of the way first, swinging the giant steel ball on the mace at his opponent every chance he got. Liquid was far too agile for the brute, but Liquid did finally note that his fishman opponent was much larger than any he had seen before. Lord Smashington was over 2 feet taller than Liquid, and had biceps the size of Liquid's starvationally diminished torso. Suddenly, Liquid put everything together. He was expected to lose this match, because they had done everything they could to make certain that he would lose. During his road to 500, the last several challengers were weaker than most, highly malnourished prisoners that didn't seem to know how to fight very well at all, and likely had only been victorious against equally inept challengers. But they came in at such a rapid succession that it was clear to Liquid now they were trying to run him ragged while simultaneously ensuring his continued victory. Exhaustion led to stupid mistakes, and Liquid did get cut, even in his very last match. The gash across his side was even bleeding right now from his attempted push-ups earlier. A couple of the stitches had come loose, and that was probably all the fishmen needed to see. Liquid knew how huge of deal gambling on these matches were to the common citizens within the Deep One's society. So, how much would one bet on his 500th victory? How many would bet on it? A tremendous amount, a jaw-dropping amount. But, as only the king and his immediate council set up the matches, it would be the king who was rigging everything to ensure that this, Liquid's 500th match, would also be his defeat. The king and his elites had clearly bet everything on his loss, and were looking to scam buku fish dollars from the common rabble. So they put him up against Lord Smashington, a guy who's had enough victories to prove his might. and this was likely his first match in a while, to give him plenty of time to recover his strength. The elites were certain that Liquid was going down. Liquid had to admit he was a little bit disappointed at the king being so willing to throw away his favorite champion for a quick buck. But that just goes to show, you never can trust a king fish. Liquid grew weary of his run and snagged a bastard sword off the weapons rack before swirling around to face his foe, who was looking furious from having done so much running. Lord Smashington lifted up his arm for an attack, and Liquid nimbly darted behind him before stabbing the giant fishman clean through his heart in a single stab. Lord Smashington cried out in pain, dropped the mace and clenched the blade in his chest, then slowly turned towards Liquid to give him the stink eye before coughing up blood and collapsing over, dead. Liquid flashed the sign language for first love and then peace over to the king, who arose furiously from his throne, barking some orders in the native fishman tongue. Oh, I totally called it, Liquid thought, taking this as confirmation of the match being a setup to have him killed.
And he's done it! Liquid has achieved his 500th victory!
The announcer declared.
And wait, what is this? Oh no, a scuffle has broken out in the crowd! It looks like,
And then the announcer's voice broke off, as he cursed in panic in his own native tongue as well. Liquid could suddenly see what the announcer had seen. In the crowd, violence had erupted suddenly. The elite wealthy fishman had bet so much money that they would be crippled if they had to pay up. So, they had planned for that eventuality as well. They were simply going to kill all of the commoners who had bet on Liquid's victory. It was a sudden and violent attack. However, the elites hadn't anticipated just how many other commoners, the ones who hadn't bet, would become scared and begin fighting back as well. So now every commoner was attempting to slay every elite. Now, all the details to that Liquid had not worked out. He just knew that there was a lot of fishmen killing a lot of other fishmen. He had no idea how much of the crowd was armed, wielding weapons that looked reminiscent of large fishing hooks. Apparently, that's a popular weapon among their kind, because everybody had one. Liquid also couldn't tell the difference between the commoners and the elites. Apparently, there was some kind of difference in how they smelled, or maybe it was an aesthetic difference that he simply could not discern. Because the deep ones were always nude, so it's not like he could tell them apart by how they dressed. As a school of fishmen fell dead, Liquid saw the guard entering the arena to escort him back out into his cell. But he also saw something a bit more interesting to him. The archway out of the arena that the audience always took to return to their own homes. On a whim, and knowing the consequences would be dire if he failed, Liquid rushed towards the wall as fast as he could, leaping, hitting halfway up it, and then kicking his feet off to boost himself the rest of the way up, grabbing hold of the stone surface. He had always figured that he could scale the 20-foot wall, but there'd never been any point in trying before. But with so many fishmen in the audience dead now, and with so much chaos going on, and the guards upstairs in a panic trying to rescue the elites from the other commoners, Liquid finally saw an exit. He pulled himself up to the top of the wall, then jumped into the audience. The few that saw him do this up there had no time to pay him much mind, as they were all fighting for their lives. The guards down in the arena, which had just come in to escort him back to his cell, could not scale the wall like he just did, so they would have to go around the long way, and that would take them quite a while. They yelled up to the guards in the stands to stop him, but they were still preoccupied. Liquid bolted across the stands to the exit, fleeing out into an unfamiliar hallway. All stone, and fairly pretty stone at that. Every tile was a splash of color, blues and greens and pinks. Luminescent lighting filled the hallway from some unknown source. Clearly, citizens got better lighting than mere torchlight like the prisoners had to work with. Picking a path, which was left, as the only other options were left or right, he ran almost immediately into more guards around the corner, ones with many pointy spears to jab right up to his neck, daring him to so much as twitch. On the other side from them, he saw none other than the king. Oh, fuck me. He would have known that the king's seat entrance was this way if only he had taken a second to consider it. Of course, the king would be getting led away by the elite guards right at this very instant, as the king wanted nothing to do with the citizens' slaughter.
You!
The king bellowed at him.
Come to finish me off after trying to financially ruin me!
So you did set this up to be a scam, Liquid replied, glad to hear it from your own ugly, bloated lips. The king glared.
How dare you! I will have you tortured for years for your insolence! I will take great glee in... Oh!
A spear pierced through the king's back and out of his chest. The king's blood splattered all over the back of the guards' heads and prompted them to turn around, which also allowed Liquid to take a few steps safely away from their spears. You will halt! A commanding voice cried out from behind the king as the guards rushed to kill the assassin. Surprisingly, the guards did, indeed, halt. Liquid saw why. The red gills on this deep one, the king's assassin.
Princess?
Liquid said quickly.
You made it out of your cell!
Did she? The deep one with red gills asked, turning back. Then he looked forward, frowning. Oh, a joke? I don't think that's funny.
Wait, you're the prince?
Liquid said aloud as he realized this. Indeed, the prince said. Or at least I was. I am king now, and shall rule in my father's stead. I will permit your verbal jab at me, as today you made my move possible. He stepped forward towards Liquid, and the guards quickly backed away from their new ruler. I've been trying for quite some time to get my father in a compromised situation where his guards were distracted, and so was he. Were I to fail to end his life, he would have had me tortured, as he has tortured my sister by imprisoning her. But she shall be freed. In fact, guard, he turned to one of them, go and have my sister released immediately, and bring her to her chambers so that she might rest. The elite guard nodded, then pushed quickly past the other guards to run off towards the cell blocks.
So,
Liquid began.
I'm guessing you weren't too pleased with your pops locking up your sister, so you took this opportunity to become king yourself? Well, bravo! Coups rarely go that smoothly. How did you know that the guard would just stand down like that, though?
You know nothing of our society, outsider, the new king said sternly.
And I really do not care to know,
Liquid said quickly. Fair enough, the new king said. But please do not think ill of us because of your treatment in our lands. Ours was never a people that took prisoners or had arenas and all this gambling until my father took over. I have always despised him from tearing us away from our roots.
Ah, so you were peaceful once.
What? No, of course not. We were a surface-dwelling rural town society who would slaughter all outsiders, not imprison them. I now seek to return us to those glory days, the new king said. Liquid nodded, understanding.
So, any chance you'll look past my outsiderness? Since I did kind of, help your ascent.
Liquid asked. Do you wish to live among us? The new king asked.
Oh, no, God. I just want to go home,
Liquid replied. The new king nodded. Then your freedom is hereby granted, and you shall be provided an escort to give you safe passage home. Well, this wasn't how Liquid was expecting today to go, but he'll take it. He showed the deep ones on a map where he called home, which was the very town he had stolen the yacht from all those many years ago. That wasn't actually his home, but it was close enough that he could likely catch a ride there. Besides, he was worried the fishmen would someday get a new ruler, one who would remember the 500 victories champion and go looking for him. Let them sack that crappy, run-down town instead of his own, finding nothing while doing so, he figured. That concludes Chapter 18 of Sheep Eater. Tune in every Tuesday for new chapters, and please subscribe to be notified the moment they're released. If you would like to reach me, you can do so at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. That's LANTISARMSTRONG. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's chapter in the not-too-distant future.